to Deep Sleep Stories. If these stories have helped you through restless nights, please leave a review. Reviews are what help this podcast grow, reach more listeners, and stay alive. Without them, even something meaningful can slowly disappear. So if this show has brought you comfort, that small act truly helps keep it going. Now, settle in, and let's begin.
Welcome to Deep Sleep Stories, a quiet place where your day can soften and drift away. Tonight you'll be carried into a gentle tale about a gardener, a hidden guest cottage, and a garden that seems to breathe with a calm, mysterious kind of magic. Loosen. If your forehead is busy, let it loosen. If your forehead is busy, let it smooth itself out. There's nowhere to go, nothing to solve, nothing to carry for a while. Breathe in slowly through your nose, as though you're drawing in the faint scent of rain on soil. Hold that breath for just a moment, and then let it out like a soft sigh. Again, a slow inhale and an easy exhale. Each breath can be a small letting go. Each breath can be a quiet permission to rest. Imagine that you're standing at the edge of evening where daylight becomes honeyed and thin. The sky is a muted blue, brushed with pale lavender, and the air is mild against your skin. Somewhere nearby a lamp has been lit, and its glow is gentle rather than bright, as if it understands that you're here to unwind. You can almost hear the low hush of leaves, the tiny tick of cooling branches, the distant call of an owl beginning its night. With every exhale, the day's noise becomes less important. Thoughts may still appear like small boats on a wide river, but you don't have to chase them. You can simply watch them pass. You can let them drift on downstream into the darkening distance. And now you can stop being the one who walks. You can stop being the one who decides. The story will carry itself like a lantern floating along a calm stream while you rest in the quiet and listen. In a valley where the hills folded together like soft blankets, there was a garden that seemed to know how to keep secrets. It belonged to a gardener named Elowen who lived and worked on an old estate at the edge of a small village. The estate had once been grand in a bright, showy way, but time had softened it into something kinder. Stone walls wore a cloak of moss. Ivy traced patient patterns along archways. The paths had a gentle curve to them, as though they'd been shaped by wandering rather than planning. Elowen loved that kind of softness. She loved the way age could make things feel more welcoming, more lived in, more forgiving. She was a gardener with quiet hands and a steady rhythm, and she carried her days like water carries light, calmly, without hurry, reflecting whatever came. In the mornings, she rose before the sun was fully awake. She brewed tea that smelled of chamomile and crushed mint. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped outside to greet the garden. Dew clung to the leaves in round beads that trembled but did not fall. Spider webs strung between stems like delicate lace caught the dawn and glimmered. The air was cool enough to feel clean. Elowen had a way of walking that made the garden feel safe. She didn't stomp or rush. She moved with a careful ease as though every stone and root deserved respect. She paused to touch the bark of the apple tree near the gate. She nodded to the rosemary bush that grew thick and fragrant by the kitchen steps. She bent to check on the tender shoots in the herb beds, speaking to them in a low voice that was not quite words, but not quite silence either. The estate's main house stood a little apart, dignified and quiet, with tall windows that reflected the sky. But Elowen's favorite place on the grounds wasn't the house at all. It was a smaller building tucked deeper into the garden, nestled beside a willow that leaned like a thoughtful friend. It was a guest cottage built long ago for travelers who arrived tired and left restored. Everyone in the village called it the gardener's guest cottage, though it belonged to the estate. That was because Elowen cared for it as lovingly as she cared for the roses and the lilies and the climbing beans. She kept it swept, its linens fresh, its fireplace ready. She placed jars of dried lavender on the windowsills, and small bundles of herbs hung from hooks in the kitchen, offering their quiet scent. There was something special about that cottage, though most people couldn't quite explain it. Some said it was the way the light fell through the old glass panes, softening the room in the afternoons. Others said it was the sound of the willow branches brushing the roof when the wind rose. A few insisted it was the garden itself, gathering around the cottage like a protective circle, keeping it warm with green presence. Elowen didn't argue with any of them. She knew the cottage had a gentle spirit. She felt it when she stepped inside and the air seemed to settle, as if the room recognized her. She felt it when she laid her palm on the wooden table and sensed the quiet history held in its grain. She felt it when she opened the cupboard and found the teacups lined up, waiting like patient little moons. But Elowen also knew something else, something she rarely spoke aloud. The garden listened, not in a way that could be proven and not in a way that demanded attention. It listened in the way a pond listens to rain, receiving it without judgment. It listened in the way a forest listens to footsteps, noticing without alarm. The garden didn't speak in sentences. It spoke in shifts of breeze, in sudden fragrance, in the way a bloom might open as if responding to a thought. Elowen had learned to listen back. She had learned that when she was anxious, the marigolds seemed to lean closer, their bright faces like gentle encouragement. When she was tired, the rosemary's scent rose stronger, as if to clear her mind. When she was lonely, the sparrows came in cheerful bursts and hopped along the path ahead of her as though leading her somewhere kinder. And when the guest cottage was meant to welcome someone, the garden gave a sign. Sometimes it was subtle, a single lanternfly landing on the cottage door, wings folded neatly like a note. Sometimes it was a little more obvious, the wind shifting to carry the scent of honeysuckle straight through the open window. Elowen never forced these moments. She only noticed them, the way you might notice a familiar melody drifting in from another room. One late afternoon, As summer began to soften into early autumn, Elowen felt that familiar hush settle over the garden. The day had been mild, with thin clouds like pale brush strokes across the sky. Elowen had spent the morning trimming herbs and tying up the last of the tall sunflowers. Their heavy heads nodded in the breeze, golden and sleepy. She had gathered a basket of late tomatoes, warm from the sun, and left them on the kitchen table in the main house for the cook. Now in the late afternoon, she stood in the cottage doorway, holding a broom, and paused. The air felt different, as though the garden had taken a slow breath and was holding it. Elowen set the broom aside. She stepped onto the cottage's small porch and looked out. The willow's leaves swayed, whispering. At first it sounded like the usual rustle, the ordinary music of trees, but then it seemed to form a softer pattern, a quieter rhythm, like the beginning of a lullaby. Elowen tilted her head, listening with her whole body. A small gust of wind curled through the garden path and brought with it the scent of crushed basil and damp earth. Even though the ground was dry, it was as if the garden was remembering rain or inviting it. Elowen's eyes drifted to the gate at the far end of the path where the hedges parted. Nothing moved there yet. Still, she felt the sense of an arrival, the way you can feel someone standing just beyond a door before you see them. She went back inside the cottage, her footsteps quiet on the wooden floor. She moved through the rooms with a calm purpose. She opened the windows a little wider, letting the air circulate. She shook out the blankets and smoothed them over the bed until the quilt lay like a calm sea. She checked the fireplace, laying kindling in a neat stack. She filled the kettle and placed it on the stove, ready for tea. Then she took a small jar from the shelf and loosened the lid. Dried lavender, pale purple and soft as dust, released its scent into the room. Elowen placed the jar on the bedside table like a gentle greeting. Outside, the light grew warmer, turning the garden into a quiet painting. Elowen stepped back onto the porch and waited. It was not long before she heard the faint sound of footsteps on the gravel path beyond the hedges. Slow steps, careful steps, as though the walker was more weary than they wanted to admit. Elowen's gaze remained soft, welcoming. She didn't lean forward or call out. She simply stood, letting the cottage be what it was meant to be. A safe place, waiting. A figure appeared at the gate, framed by greenery. It was a woman wrapped in a travel cloak that had seen many roads. Her hair was tucked back, though loose strands escaped and curled around her face. She carried a small bag and a staff, and her shoulders held the slight forward tilt of someone who had been bracing against wind for too long. When she saw the cottage, she stopped, just for a moment, as if she had found something she didn't know she'd been searching for. Elowen stepped down from the porch and walked along the path toward her. The garden seemed to hush even further, as though it wanted to hear their first words. "Good evening," Elowen said, her voice as gentle as the light. You've come at a quiet hour. The traveler's eyes looked tired but kind. I didn't mean to intrude, she said. I was told there might be a place to rest, a small cottage cared for by a gardener. Elowen smiled just a little. You're not intruding. This is what it's here for. The garden has been expecting you. The traveler blinked as if she might ask what that meant, but her shoulders eased instead, as though she accepted the mystery without needing it explained. Then I'm grateful, she said softly. My name is Mira. Elowen, the gardener replied. She reached out and took the traveler's bag with an easy confidence, as if carrying burdens was part of her work. Come, the kettle is ready, and the evening is kind. Together they walked toward the cottage. Mira's steps slowed as she entered the circle of the garden. Her breath shifted. Elowen noticed it. The way the traveler's chest rose more fully, the way her gaze softened. It was as if the air itself was helping her remember how to rest. Inside, the cottage welcomed Mira with warmth that didn't come from a fire, but from care. The wooden beams overhead looked sturdy and familiar. The small table held a vase of fresh flowers, simple ones, daisies and small bluebells, gathered from the edges of the beds. The curtains moved in a mild breeze, and the light in the room was honey-colored, calm and sleepy. Mira stood just inside the door, her hands still holding the edges of her cloak. She looked around slowly, taking it all in, as though she had stepped into a remembered dream. It feels, she began, then paused. Safe? Elowen offered. Mira let out a breath that sounded like relief. Yes, she said, safe and quiet, as if the world outside has stopped asking anything of me. Elowen nodded, as though she understood exactly. She guided Mira to a chair by the small table. Sit, she said gently. Let your bones remember what it's like to be supported. While Mira settled, Elowen poured hot water into a teapot, adding dried chamomile and a pinch of mint. The herbs swirled, releasing their scent. She placed a cup in front of Mira, along with a small plate of oat biscuits that Elowen had baked that morning. Mira wrapped her hands around the warm cup and closed her eyes. The steam touched her face like a blessing. She took a slow sip. Her shoulders lowered another inch. Outside, the garden moved through its own evening rituals. Birds tucked themselves into branches. The sky deepened, the edges of the clouds turning soft and gray. The first star appeared, faint and patient. Elowen sat across from Mira, not pressing for conversation. She knew that rest came easier when it wasn't demanded. Instead, she let silence be a companion, sitting with it comfortably. After a while, Mira spoke, her voice quiet. I've been traveling for a long time, she said. Not just miles. It feels like I've been carrying a tightness, a thread wrapped too many times around my thoughts. Elowen listened, her eyes steady and kind. Sometimes we don't notice the thread until we find a place gentle enough to feel it, she said. You don't have to untangle it all at once. Mira's mouth curved into something like a smile. You speak as if you've met many travelers. I've met many kinds of tired, Elowen said softly. The garden brings them here when it can. Mira looked toward the window, where the willow's branches swayed. Is that true? She asked. That the garden brings them? Elowen didn't answer quickly. She chose her words the way she chose seeds, with care. I think the garden knows how to offer what is needed, she said at last. Sometimes it offers a quiet path. Sometimes it offers a place to sleep. Sometimes it offers a reminder that the world can still be gentle. Mira nodded slowly, as though something in her recognized the truth of that. She took another sip of tea, then let her eyes rest on the flowers in the vase. They look as if they've just been picked, she murmured. They have, Elowen said. Freshness helps a room feel alive. Even a resting place should feel like it's welcoming you, not merely storing you. Mira's fingers traced the rim of her cup. In the towns I've passed through, people talk about this cottage like it's a rumor, she said. They say it appears when you need it. Elowen's smile was quiet. It's always here, she said. But perhaps some people only notice it when they're ready. The evening eased onward. Elowen offered Mira a basin of warm water to wash her hands and face, scented with a drop of lavender. Mira's movements were slow, almost reverent, as though she were washing away not only dust from the road, but the heaviness she'd been carrying. Then Elowen showed her the bedroom, small and cozy. A quilt covered the bed, stitched with patterns of vines and small blossoms. The window beside it looked out into the garden, where moonlight now began to gather like pale silk. A candle sat on the bedside table, unlit, waiting. Mira touched the quilt lightly. It's beautiful, she whispered. Sleep does better in a beautiful place, Elowen said. Your mind will believe in rest more easily. Mira turned and looked at her with a gentleness that felt like gratitude. Will you stay? She asked, then shook her head quickly as if she worried the request was too much. I mean, only for a moment. It's been a long time since I've felt held by anything. Elowen's eyes softened. I can stay for a little while, she said. And if you like, I can tell you about the garden. Not as a lesson, as a lullaby. Mira sat on the edge of the bed. Elowen pulled the chair closer and sat beside her, angled toward the window. The garden outside shimmered with quiet. Fireflies blinked in the darker corners, small pulses of light like slow thoughts. Elowen, Mira said quietly, why do you tend this place? The estate is old. The work must be endless. It is endless, Elowen agreed, her voice calm. But it's the kind of endless that feels peaceful. A garden is never finished, and that is part of its gift. It always allows tomorrow to be softer than today. She paused, listening to the willow. The branches brushed against one another with a sound like slow applause. When I was younger, Elowen continued, I thought I wanted to know everything. I wanted answers that stayed put. But the garden taught me something different. It taught me to notice, to accept cycles, to understand that some things don't need to be solved, only tended. Mira's eyelids were already growing heavy, as if Elowen's words were settling over her like a blanket. "Elowen," Mira murmured, "does the garden ever feel lonely?" Elowen smiled, as though the question held sweetness. "No," she said, "because it's always in conversation with wind, with rain, with moonlight, with roots. Even when no one is here, it's still connected." Mira's breathing slowed. "I'd like to learn that," she whispered. "You already are," Elowen said, "just by being here." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Elowen didn't fill the space. She let the quiet do its work. Outside, the moon climbed higher, silvering the leaves. The world seemed to exhale. When Elowen finally stood, Mira's eyes were half closed. "I'll leave you to rest," Elowen said softly. "If you need anything, I'm nearby, and the garden will keep watch." Mira's lips parted, as if she might say thank you, but the words didn't quite form. Instead, she simply nodded, a small movement that carried deep relief. Elowen moved to the door and paused. "One more thing," she said gently. "In the morning, if you feel like it, you can walk the garden paths. There's a small stone bench near the pond. The water there is very calm. It helps thoughts settle." Mira's eyes fluttered. "A pond," she repeated faintly, like the word itself was soothing. "Yes," Elowen said. "Good night." Elowen stepped out, closing the door with care, leaving it latched but not locked. The cottage breathed quietly, as if it had been waiting all day to cradle someone. Outside, Elowen stood on the porch and looked out over the garden. The moonlight made the paths pale and dreamlike. She felt the presence of the night creatures, moths, small beetles, the unseen fox moving at the edge of the hedges. She felt the garden's steady awareness, its calm patience. She walked along the path, her feet knowing every stone. She checked the lanterns, making sure they were sheltered from the wind. She touched the hydrangeas, their blossoms heavy and soft. She listened to the pond in the distance, its surface barely moving. When she reached the pond, she stopped. The water reflected the moon like a quiet mirror. Reeds grew along the edges, their tops swaying. The air here smelled cool and clean. Elowen knelt and dipped her fingers into the water. It was cold, but not harsh. She lifted her hand and let the droplets fall back, one by one, making tiny rings that spread and faded. "Welcome," she whispered to the garden, though the garden did not need to be welcomed. "Thank you." A breeze moved through the reeds, and the willow's branches shivered as if responding. Elowen sat on the stone bench and allowed herself a moment of stillness. She thought of Mira in the cottage, letting go of the road. She imagined the traveler's dreams beginning to soften like fabric warmed by the sun. In time, Elowen stood and returned to her small gardener's room near the tool shed, where she kept her own simple bed and her own small lamp. She washed her hands, the scent of soil lingering beneath her nails. She drank a final sip of tea and blew out the lamp. The estate settled deeper into night. In the guest cottage, Mira lay beneath the quilt. The lavender jar on the bedside table offered its gentle scent, drifting in slow waves. The window was slightly open, letting in the cool breath of the garden. Somewhere nearby, the willow whispered its endless, soothing song. Mira's dreams began in fragments: a path, a lantern, a cup of tea. But soon the fragments stitched themselves together into something smoother. In her dream, she was walking through the garden, but she was not tired. Her feet were light, her shoulders relaxed. The path beneath her was soft, as though the earth itself wanted her to be comfortable. Flowers glowed faintly in the moonlight, their colors deep and velvety. The air felt like cool silk, brushing her skin. As she walked, she noticed that the garden seemed to recognize her. Leaves tilted toward her as if curious. A rose opened slowly, releasing fragrance like a quiet greeting. Fireflies hovered near her hands, their lights blinking in slow, patient rhythms. She came to the pond, the one Elowen had mentioned. The stone bench waited beside it. Mira sat, and the water in front of her was so calm it looked like another sky. In the pond's reflection, she didn't see her weary travel cloak. She didn't see dust or strain. She saw herself as she once was, open-eyed, unburdened, quiet. The pond didn't ask her to be anyone else. It simply held the reflection, steady and kind. Mira watched the water for a long time. Thoughts rose in her mind, but they did not sting. They floated like leaves and then drifted away. Her breath matched the slow movement of the reeds. On the far side of the pond, the willow stood, its branches sweeping low. In her dream, she could hear it speaking, not in words, but in feeling. It said, "Rest." It said, "Here." It said, "You can stop holding so tightly." Mira leaned back on the bench and let her eyes close. The moon above her felt like a soft hand placed gently on her forehead. The air smelled of damp earth and mint. She drifted deeper into sleep, and the dream changed again. Now she was inside the cottage, but the walls seemed to glow faintly, as if the wood held sunlight inside it. The quilt on the bed was like a meadow, stitched with vines that slowly moved, just barely, like living plants. The lavender scent was stronger here, wrapping around her like comfort. In the corner of the room, a small lamp flickered, though no one had lit it. Its flame was calm, steady, a tiny heart of light. Mira understood without thinking too hard that the cottage itself was a kind of guardian. It didn't watch with sharpness, it watched with warmth. It simply held space for her to be quiet and safe. Outside, the garden continued its own gentle tending. Night insects sang their thin songs. Leaves shifted, the pond reflected, the willow whispered. The world kept breathing. Toward the edge of the dream, Mira sensed Elowen, not as a figure, not as a voice, but as a presence like steady hands. The gardener's care seemed to move through the cottage like a soft current. smoothing the air, keeping it calm. And in that calm, Mira's body loosened further, her fingers unclenched, her shoulders melted into the mattress, her jaw softened. The tight thread she had spoken of began to unwind, not all at once, but enough. When morning came, it arrived quietly. A pale light slipped through the window, gentle as milk. Birds began to sing, tentative at first, then more certain. The garden woke without startling anyone. It shifted into a new day the way a sleeping person shifts beneath blankets. Slowly, peacefully, Mira opened her eyes and lay still, listening. The cottage felt warm, though the air was cool. She inhaled, smelling lavender and clean wood and something green from outside. For a moment, she didn't remember the road. She didn't remember the heaviness. She simply existed, resting in a calm pocket of time. She sat up slowly, noticing how different her body felt. Lighter, less braced, as if the night had gently ironed out the creases in her spirit. She dressed and stepped outside. The garden greeted her with dew and bird song. Sunlight filtered through leaves, scattering in patterns across the path. The willow moved softly, and in its movement Mira felt something like recognition. She walked the paths as Elowen had suggested, letting her feet choose the direction without thinking. She passed beds of herbs, their scents rising as she brushed by. Rosemary, thyme, basil, each one offering its quiet clarity. She passed sunflowers bowing in the morning light, still bright, still kind. When she reached the pond, she saw the stone bench waiting. She sat, and the water in front of her was calm, reflecting the sky. The reeds swayed and the breeze felt cool against her cheeks. Mira closed her eyes and breathed. Inhale, exhale. The world did not demand anything. The garden did not ask her to explain herself. It only offered its steady presence. After a while, footsteps approached along the path. Mira opened her eyes and saw Elowen coming toward her with 2 cups of tea, steam rising in soft curls. "I thought you might be here," Elowen said, sitting beside her, offering a cup. Mira accepted it, warming her hands around it. "It feels like the pond holds everything gently," she said, as if it knows how to keep secrets without making them heavy. Elowen smiled. "That's a good way to put it," she said. "Water has always known how to carry things and still remain calm." They sat together in comfortable silence, sipping tea, listening to birds and reeds and breeze. Mira didn't feel the need to tell her whole story. Elowen didn't need it. The garden didn't need it. Rest was not a transaction here. It was simply offered. As the sun rose higher, Mira felt something settle inside her, like a stone placed carefully at the bottom of a river, steady, quiet, present. She stayed at the cottage for a time, long enough to remember her own softness, long enough to feel the thread unwind further. She helped Elowen in the garden, but only gently, watering seedlings, gathering herbs, tying up vines. The work was slow and soothing. It felt like a kind of meditation. And every evening, when the light turned honeyed again, Mira returned to the guest cottage. She drank tea and watched the garden shift into twilight. She listened to the willow. She let the lavender scent remind her that rest could be simple. The garden continued to listen, and in its listening, it seemed to teach her how to listen to herself. Over time, Mira began to understand that the cottage was not only a place, it was a pause, a breath, a gentle space between one chapter and the next. When the day came that she felt ready to travel again, it wasn't because the world had become less complicated. It was because her body remembered how to soften. Her mind remembered how to loosen its grip. Her heart remembered that safety could exist, even if only in pockets of time and places like this. On her last morning, Mira stood at the cottage door with her small bag in hand. Elowen waited beside the path, the gardener's hands tucked into her apron pockets, her expression calm and kind. "I don't know how to thank you," Mira said. Elowen shook her head gently. "You don't have to," she replied. "The garden gave you what it could. I only tended what was already here." Mira looked back at the cottage one last time. The window caught the light. The willow leaned close, leaves trembling softly. "I feel like it will always be here," Mira said. "It will," Elowen answered. "And if you ever need it again, the path will find you. Or you will find the path." Mira nodded, her eyes shining with quiet understanding. She stepped onto the road beyond the hedges, and the garden seemed to exhale, not in sadness, in gentle acceptance, in trust. Elowen watched until Mira disappeared around the bend, then turned back toward the cottage. The garden awaited her, patient as always. There were always seedlings to tend, paths to sweep, herbs to gather. There was always the soft work of care. As the day continued, the cottage stood nestled beneath the willow, ready for the next weary traveler, ready to offer warmth, lavender, and quiet. The garden listened. The pond reflected. The wind moved through leaves like a slow song. And now, as you listen, you can let this story become like that pond, smooth and still. You don't need to hold every detail. You don't need to remember names or paths. You can let the images blur softly at the edges, like mist over morning grass. Feel how heavy your body is against the bed. Feel how supported you are. Let your breathing slow again, easy and unforced. Inhale, gentle as a breeze through reeds. Exhale, soft as the sigh of a willow. If thoughts appear, let them drift like leaves on water. No need to chase them, no need to push them away. Just let them float and fade into the calm. Imagine the guest cottage now, quiet in the night. The quilt is smooth. The lavender scent is faint and soothing. The window is open to the garden's cool breath. Outside, the pond reflects the moon, still and patient. The willow whispers its slow lullaby. Everything is tending you without effort. Your shoulders can soften, your jaw can loosen, your hands can rest, open and unguarded. The story is slowing now like a lantern dimming to a warm glow. The garden grows quieter. The cottage grows darker. The pond becomes a mirror of night. The willow's song becomes a hush, and you can drift, and you can rest, and you can sleep. Good night, dear traveler. Sleep well.